And if you're not down with that, we got 2 words for ya.
In the late 1990s, a few wrestling shirts were must-cops on the block. Austin 316 shirts were everywhere, and you couldn't avoid seeing NWO gear either. But if there was one group whose merchandise defined the rebellious era, it was D-Generation X. DX wasn't just about breaking the rules. They took pride in smashing them. Their unapologetic attitude, sharp humor, and anti-authority stance resonated with an entire generation of fans. So, what was it that made DX so iconic? What kept fans glued to their TV screens every week? Stick around as we take a deep dive into their incredible journey through the wrestling world. Let's get ready to break it down. Quite literally. The story of D-Generation X begins with The Click. In the mid-90s, 5 men ruled WWE's backstage. Shawn Michaels, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Triple H, and Sean Waltman. They were known as The Click, and they had significant political power in the company, using it to get the best spots on the card while burying their rivals. But by 1996, WWE was facing financial difficulties, and Ted Turner's WCW offered Hall and Nash lucrative contracts they couldn't refuse. Before long, Waltman joined them, leaving only Shawn Michaels and Triple H holding down the fort. It seemed like the Click's influence had dwindled, until Shawn Michaels and Triple H came up with a new plan. By 1997, although WWE had tried to keep the two apart on screen, their friendship off-screen never wavered. It wasn't long before they convinced Vince McMahon to let them unite on television. And then it happened. On the August 11th, 1997 episode of Raw, DX was born. Triple H and Chyna interfered in Shawn's match against Mankind, sparking what would become the most infamous faction in WWE history. At this point, they hadn't even scratched the surface. With the addition of Rick Rude as their insurance policy, DX began making waves in WWE. They mocked authority, pushing every boundary they could, and fans loved it. Their feud with The Undertaker reached new heights, and their brand of crude humor hit just the right note with the late 90s anti-hero culture. Just think about it. This was the era of South Park and The Simpsons, where rebellion was celebrated, and DX embodied that spirit perfectly. Vince McMahon knew this was a goldmine, and decided DX's attitude was the key to pushing WWE in the right direction. Things escalated further at the infamous Montreal Screwjob. In November 1997, Shawn Michaels and Triple H conspired with Vince McMahon to screw Bret Hart out of the WWE title just before he was set to leave for WCW. The fallout. Fans absolutely hated Michaels, but it was exactly what DX needed to become the top heels in WWE. And while you've probably heard about the Montreal Screwjob, it's worth remembering that it didn't just affect the fans, it changed everything behind the scenes too. Bret Hart's real-life animosity with Shawn Michaels had become one of the most intense feuds in wrestling history, both on-screen and off. And when Bret called DX degenerates during a heated promo, it gave Shawn and Triple H the perfect name for their faction. From then on, they proudly referred to themselves as D-Generation X, and that's when things really took off. What's even more interesting is that, while DX was rising in WWE, their friends over in WCW were dominating the industry with the NWO. It was like the Click had split into 2 factions, and both were taking over wrestling on their own terms. Whether it was DX in WWE or the NWO in WCW, the wrestling world was in the palm of their hands. Fast forward to after the Screwjob, Shawn Michaels was on top of the world, but his reign came crashing down in 1998 due to a serious back injury. Forced to retire, he left Triple H to take over DX, and what did Triple H do? He rebuilt the faction, bringing in new members like the new Age Outlaws and X-Pac. And just like that, DX was back, stronger than ever. Remember when they famously invaded a WCW show in a tank? That was DX at its peak. rebellious, outrageous, and completely unforgettable. As DX evolved, their feuds with stars like The Rock and the Nation of Domination became legendary. The rivalry between Triple H and The Rock helped elevate both men into megastars. But behind the scenes, things were starting to unravel. Chyna, who had been an integral part of DX, left to join the corporation, and soon after, Triple H shocked the world by turning heel and aligning with the corporate machine himself. It seemed like DX had reached its end, but this wouldn't be the last time we saw them. By 2006, something incredible happened. Shawn Michaels returned from his career-ending injury, and for fans who had been waiting for years, it seemed like the perfect time for a DX reunion. But this wasn't the same DX from the 90s. Shawn had gone through a transformation. He was now a born-again Christian, and that affected how DX presented themselves. They were still rebellious, but there was a new tone to their antics. They feuded with Vince and Shane McMahon, providing some of the most entertaining moments in WWE during that era. If you were a fan of the original DX, this newer version might have felt a little more toned down, but it resonated with a whole new generation of younger fans who loved it. And that's what made DX so special. They were able to reinvent themselves, staying relevant with different eras of wrestling fans. They weren't the rebellious kids from the 90s anymore, but they didn't need to be. By this point, Triple H and Shawn Michaels were legends, and they embraced their new roles while paying homage to the past. Even though DX had evolved over the years, they never lost their charm. Whether it was their legendary feuds, their over-the-top antics, or their ability to reinvent themselves, DX will always be remembered as one of the most iconic factions in wrestling history. And in the years since their prime, WWE hasn't hesitated to bring them back for one-off appearances, much to the delight of fans. Remember Raw 1000? The entire DX crew came together, including Triple H, Shawn, Billy Gunn, Road Dogg, and X-Pac, as they celebrated their incredible legacy in front of a roaring crowd. It's clear that while DX may no longer be active, their impact on wrestling is everlasting. Every time WWE needs a quick boost in ratings or wants to tap into that nostalgia, DX is there to remind fans why they were one of the best things to ever happen in professional wrestling. And if you're not down with that, well, you know what they'd say? We've got 2 words for you. Suck it!